Welcome to the 2021 Humanities Summit. I'm Mark Kenuel. I'm director of the Institute for the Humanities, and I'd like to thank all of you, audience and speakers, for joining us. I hope you're staying safe and well and finding ways to connect even in this continuing challenging moment. I don't want to take up too much time here, but rather first alert you to a couple of upcoming events. Freddie Gonzalez will be presenting our first faculty fellow lecture of the year on building a global brotherhood, the Chicandong 1917 to 1925. That will take place on Thursday, September 23rd, 2021 at 4 p.m. in room 302 SCE. Because of capacity restrictions for safety, we ask that you register for this event. And we will simultaneously hold this event on Zoom, and we ask you to register for that in advance as well by emailing us at the Institute. On October 7th and 8th, we'll be holding our conference called Beyond Binary, Genders in the Past, Present, and Future, a conference about non-binary gender dynamics and identities. This is the very first conference on this subject in the US, and we're very excited about this collaboration between the Institute, or I should say among the Institute, the Gender and Sexuality Center, and the College of Education, among numerous other collaborators across the campus. This will be held via Zoom, and you can register by emailing us at the Institute or visiting our website. And we expect to have a direct link to that conference registration very soon. I'd like to take a chance for a few quick thank yous as well. First to Ellen McClure for her courageous, brilliant, and industrious leadership of the Engaged Humanities initiative. And I look forward to many more collaborations with Ellen in the future to bolster the humanities together in the future. We're already talking about something new, but it's a top secret. I can't let you know, but it's really amazing. And I do want to mention Janaea Shaw, who we all love and appreciate so much for helping us bring dreams to reality. I'd like to thank Laura Hostetler for taking the reins of the EHI, and I'm looking forward to continuing our close relationship at the Institute with the Engaged Humanities initiative. It's a wonderfully dynamic program, and I want to do all I can to support it. Finally, I'd like to announce with heaping thanks Linda Vavra's 35 years working at the University of Illinois at Chicago. This is her 35th year anniversary, and she spent not all of it, but the vast majority of it at the Institute. People talk much about the importance of institutional memory, and I think that Linda Vavra embodies that memory by providing the kind of continuity that's necessary for serious growth. She approaches her position not only by preserving that memory, but with an inventiveness and resourcefulness as we look into shaping our collective future. So thank you, Linda, from the bottom of my heart, and speaking for everyone else's hearts as well. And also just please join me in applauding these amazing women who helped to bring so much light into the world of humanities leadership. Thank all of you so much. I would like to hand this over to Laura Hostetler to chair this panel.
Thank you, Mark. And welcome again, everyone, to our Humanities Summit, Fall 2021. I'm really looking forward to this chance to hear what both students and faculty have been working on. And part one, Students Speak. We'll hear some of the fruit of the EHI summer research opportunities. Really looking forward to that. And then in part two, this afternoon at 12, we'll hear about the humanities in Chicago, health, politics, environment, and culture. This will feature 5 of our colleagues at UIC and be moderated by Ellen McClure. I also wanted to mention the Mellon Lecture in Engage Humanities, which is coming up on October 26th. Kaya McClure from Columbia will be speaking on Caribbean digital community towards archives of the future. So watch for more information on that. Should be wonderful. I'm also very much looking forward to starting up the EHI working group again. And I wanted to encourage the undergrads in the EHI to stay tuned also for information on an upcoming workshop we're planning on applications to grad school and how to go about that. We're very much looking forward to today's program, but before we do that, I just want to take a moment to recognize Ellen McClure and her role as the inaugural director of the EHI. Ellen, you created a program where there was none before. No infrastructure, no space, no presence, and along with it, a community of scholarship that we're all now involved in and all very grateful for. You formed connections among undergraduates, graduate students, and faculty, fostered conversations across disciplines from English to neuroscience, education to urban planning, law to sociology, and even across East and West campuses. You have embraced innovative approaches that were developed within UIC's interdisciplinary units and by UIC faculty, and you have sparked conversations about humanities research and pedagogy among all these groups of people. And you did all this while holding our students at the center of your vision. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And because the students are at the center of this, I invite a couple of them to also share a few words of thanks. Jasmine, why don't you unmute yourself and begin?
Hi, Ellen. So I'm bad at speaking, so I wrote something. Don't know how that's gonna go, but here we go. Before I started college, I didn't really know anything about research, what it was, what it could look like, or really who it was for, and I only really stumbled into the EHI via Humanities 101. And even after that class, I was really unsure whether or not research of the humanities was something that I cared about. I watched some of my friends kind of turn away from it, and I wasn't sure if it was something that was meant for me. But Ellen, you specifically encouraged me, and while I was still very much unsure of what could come next, you told me that through your words and your actions that I belonged here. And you have a very wonderful smile. You know, it always seemed a bit boring to me, but when I see you smiling as brightly as you do, I can't help but wonder if there's something fun that's lurking beneath the seemingly dull facade of what research puts on. And here I am. And it is a lot of fun, but it's also very scary, and it's also very confusing. And well, you're undoubtedly amazing during all the fun times in research. I think the moments where you left the most impact on us as students is when times were really tough. I mean, who could have anticipated that the world as we knew it would have changed completely on a Friday afternoon in March? Nothing about the world today looks anything like it did before. But you not only helped the EHI stay its course, but you navigated those choppy waters with finesse and compassion. I, like many others, struggled with the pandemic and all the violence of that summer of 2020, and I didn't know left from right. And despite that confusion and my inability to complete any work that summer, you still let your compassion and faith in my ability as a scholar, you still believed in me. And you allowed for me to lean into that confusion and find something new along the way. And you always know the right things to say. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't think about a story you mentioned, where you took a Russian literature course and could probably talk at length about poetry in Russian, but most likely could not order a coffee in Russia if it came down to it. And to me, that small and hilarious story highlights the fun of research and its nicheness. And I'm always very comforted by it because I think it's a good way to remember that there's always more to be learned. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that that you, Ellen, you're like another mother to me here at UIC. Can always count on your support and encouragement, and your faith in me despite my own failures or shortcomings. And your love of the EHI students is unconditional. And it's really hard to find that unconditional love outside of family and friends. And it's nearly impossible to find that in a mentor figure in college. And college on its own is already very isolating. And along with the pandemic and just physical separation from the outside world, I thought it would be impossible to find unconditional love and support at school. So I've been very blessed and lucky to find that in Ellen. And I truly wish that I could have you graduating with me as director this year. Okay. But I just want to say thank you so much for being here these past few years. And I never could have imagined the opportunities I've been afforded through your faith in me.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. Sophia also has a few words that she'd like to share in recognition of Ellen.
I mean, guys, how do I follow that? Yeah, no, just to really reiterate some of the stuff that she said was like, over the past year, I know that there's been a lot of social and emotional challenges for everyone, but I think one of the things that EHI and Ellen, you really did a great job of was providing a safe space that everyone could talk about how they were feeling. Because I know that that's really challenging, and you didn't try to always say that things would be okay, but instead you would just provide a space where we were able to feel like things couldn't be okay if we needed to. And I definitely took advantage of that. You allowed us to like learn and be curious in a new way, and showed that research isn't always linear. And I think for a lot of us, thinking about research, it's a very daunting thing. But you always made it feel that it was a space where we could experiment and change courses if we needed to. So I know that your spirit will not be forgotten in all of our work as we continue.
Thank you so much, Sophia. I know Mark has already introduced Janaea Shaw, and I need to also say a few words about her. And I'm going to link this to recognition of Ellen, because hiring her is another of Ellen's accomplishments, finding this wonderful person to join us. Janaea, your presence, enthusiasm, skills, commitments to the students, foresight, this whole really gave me the courage to step into Ellen's shoes as faculty director. So thank you, and I really look forward to working with you in this capacity. I also wanted to recognize that the grant has 2 new PIs on the grant, Rebecca Rugg, Dean of the College of Architecture, Design, and the Arts, and Rosalie Hernandez of Associate Dean in LAS. I want to thank them for their commitment to the EHI's vision. And now, let's hear the students speak, mainly. We have 5 student presenters today, and I've asked them to each take up to about 10 minutes for their presentations. And then we'll have time for 1 or 2 questions after each presentation. And if there's time at the end, we can have more questions and a general discussion. And I'd like to ask each student, too, as part of their presentation, to identify the mentor that helped to guide them in their research over this summer. Our first student presenter is Rocky Helmgren, and she'll be talking about her research on biracialism and Black essentialism. Rocky, you have the floor.
Okay, first of all, hello, good morning. I'm Rocky Helmgren, and I am doing research currently on biracial and Black essentialism. Currently, my research is focusing in the Black Studies department. So I'm just going to kind of give a little background and a little bit of context as to the formation of my research and kind of how it's been going, and how I've kind of navigated through it since I started it. So I first began thinking about my research topic during Professor Laura Hostetler's Hume 201 class, which was during the fall of 2019. This course was centered around narratives of displacement and finding a place between. We were tasked with thinking about how we experienced a border or a boundary in our own lives, as we read supplemental materials about how other people had experienced it in their narratives in their lives as well. As I was thinking about the task and I was trying to write my first paper for the class, I started to think more abstractly because I've kind of lived in the same place my whole life. And so a physical border, a literal border, wasn't going to fit what I wanted to speak about. And so I decided to write about the racial boundary in my life that exists because I have one Black parent and one white parent. This narrative essay developed eventually into a longer narrative based, but also still research based essay at the beginning of the semester. And throughout that process, I had many long conversations where I was able to experience Professor Laura's wisdom and her insight into some of the things that I hadn't even thought about, and how some of her insightful questions kind of brought out some things within myself that I hadn't even considered before. And that kind of introduced me to how research can be very personal, more informal than I thought. I thought it was just, going and looking up different research articles and reading these long, dense things, but I realized how close to home and how narrative-based research could really be, and how personal and kind of vulnerable you can get during your research, and kind of navigating through the scary parts of it, as well as the outcome, which was very, I would say, empowering, and allowed me to kind of explore a new part of myself that I hadn't even ever experienced or had even considered. So this paper ended up being called "Is Being Biracial Truly Having Bi Identity?" And it was about a conversation on acceptance within and without two identities and finding a place in between both. This paper ended up challenging the preconceived notions that being a biracial person in America is simply cool or the best of both worlds, as I've heard my whole life. And so through this experience, I was able to come up with a research topic when we were prompted by the EHI to come up with a research topic. And I knew that exploring the impacts of having a specifically Black-white bi-identity in such a racially binary society was going to be at the center of my topic. I hadn't specifically figured out how I was going to explore this yet, but I knew that I wanted to bring attention to the identity-based pushback that occurs specifically in biracial members of the Black community. So I was kind of freaking out at this point, I'm not gonna lie. And I began to brainstorm with Ellen and Margot frequently about exactly how I wanted to frame this research. I had a broad topic, but I was felt like I was kind of just in a sea. It was kind of trying to find my way around, and through the guidance of Ellen and Margot, I was able to frame exactly how I wanted to do this research. And originally, I ended up going in the direction of Black Twitter's discussion on biracial individuals. And this was just before the pandemic and the race riots of 2020. So, starting this semester and starting my online research, Black Twitter and all of Twitter, for that matter, the conversation shifted towards police brutality, and I found that while conducting my research, I was constantly bombarded with the reposting of the violence on Black bodies, my people's abuse, which was constantly shared and reshared on the timeline, and I found that the mental exhaustion, trauma, anguish that occurred from consuming this constantly was just too much for me to handle at the time. And through the guidance of Ellen specifically talking about mental health and meditation and mindfulness, and telling us that part of research was our self-care, because you can't perform research without first taking care of yourself. I shifted my research in order to focus on this. And honestly, I think that was probably a really pivotal point. That conversation that we all had with Ellen about self-care was a very pivotal point in not only my research, but also my life in general. And I decided to be kinder to myself and stop guilting myself for not being as productive as I felt like I should be, even when it was putting my mental health in jeopardy, both in my research and outside of my research. So I began to look at biracial Black people, the representations of them in the media, which for me included TV programs like All American, Blackish, Mixedish, and Oprah's Light Girls. And this allowed me to enjoy what I was researching and kind of feel like I wasn't researching while I was, and being able to decompress, as well as turning my attention to YouTube, where I came across creators like Chrissy and Lana Summer, as well as YouTube videos about self-care and mental health. So I was able to kind of combine these things, and that was kind of how I worked over the summer, summarizing some of my findings at the end of the summer. And that's when I began my search for a mentor. I hit a few walls on my initial search, some non-responses, and some I just didn't end up clicking with, or they felt like they weren't the person to really help me with my research. And finally, at the end of 2020, in December, I was able to connect with Professor Cynthia Blair in Black Studies. And we clicked right away during our first meeting. And finally, after a long search, my mentor search was over. Throughout the winter break, we kind of hit the ground running and began to form a formal research topic, which ended up landing on the topic of Black essentialism, or the concept of what authentic Blackness is and its relation to biracial, specifically Black and white individuals. I did an independent study with Professor Blair at the beginning of this year, in the spring semester of this year. And I was able to come up with a formal research proposal, and decided to collect my data for my research through surveys and interviews, as well as I knew that I wanted to do a blog, and kind of incorporate a website function into it. And I decided to just focus on the development of my website for the summer. I wasn't exactly sure how I wanted to implement the blog yet, and I hadn't exactly done the surveys and interviews yet, but I was kind of working on that. So I've recently, after a summer of kind of hectic things, I recently was able to land on exactly how I was going to incorporate the blogs and the research together. And recently I've decided to figure out a couple of central topics and make blog posts about them, and kind of incorporate the data that I collect from my research into it. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Rocky, and beautifully timed, just under 10. So I would like to, invite questions for Rocky. We'd have a couple moments to do that. And I really appreciated getting the overview kind of from the beginning of how your interest developed into how they were shaped, and it brought me a little back to what Sophia had to say about, this is not a linear process with humanities research, and how do we we're so used to making lists and wanting to do the next thing and see progress. How do we relax into that? So I really appreciate your sharing about that, and learning about the exciting place that you've come to.
Shruti has her hand up.
Yeah,
And I can.
question.
Oh, good.
Sorry,
Absolutely.
I hadn't mean to cut you off. But like you mentioned that your process was very not linear. But what's the biggest tip you can give to incoming undergrad into EHI for how to deal with that and like how to not feel like you have to go linear, or like how did you deal with that in terms of the mental preparation for that?
I think the main thing for me, honestly, was just Sophia mentioned this, was being honest. Ellen opened our meetings, our check-ins over the summers, always by starting out with how are we doing, how are we feeling, and how do we feel like things are going, and just learning to be honest about it and not feeling like I have to put on a front like, oh yeah, I'm totally like making sure everything's going linear and like it's, going on the path it's supposed to be, and honestly just saying, you know what, it's not going great this week. Like, I've had a couple of setbacks and, this is where I am. This is what I've been able to do, but just kind of being honest about it. It's kind of scary at first, especially as somebody who always feels like I have to have everything, together and planned out perfectly. But just learning how to really just be honest. And Ellen, Janaea and Margot were always great about giving us a plan, giving us advice, and telling us exactly, what we could do, what we should do, and also just that it was okay.
Yeah. I'll just add, first of all, oh my gosh, you guys, stop. Thank you so much. Now I get to say it, and like I said in the chat, it takes a village, and this is like one of the best villages in the universe. I could not have done a single thing without pretty much everybody on these boxes and well beyond. But I just want to add, so much of research, we forget how much of it is listening. Right. And I know Laura is an advocate of this method too, right? Of quieting yourself down and listening to yourself, listening to what the data is telling you, listening to how it makes you feel. Even if something's hard, actually, what's a really great technique is to ask yourself why it's hard, right? That's instead of just, oh, this is hard, I can't do it. That's actually an invitation to be like, why is this hard? Is it hard because I'm resisting it? Is it hard because there's something about this that's, I remember back in the day we were reading Dante's Divine Comedy, and you get to paradise, and he basically says, okay, you people with little boats, like you can't follow me here because this is going to be really weird and heavy and abstract. And then, I was TAing it at the time, and the students were like, we didn't understand anything. It's like, well, he told you weren't going to understand anything. It's not about understanding. So to see difficulty as an invitation instead of you can't do this, right? To see it as like, oh, this is an opportunity to ask questions, find out more about myself, find out more about the material. What do I need to go figure out? And also just, it's so hard with all the stress that everybody's under to find the time and the space to just settle and do that listening. And so that comes back to the self-care, but that's part of the process. It's not a optional part, that's actually the core of it, and to not forget that. So that's my words of such as they are. So but you guys are also awesome.
Thank you so very much, Rocky, and also Ellen. I feel like I'm being mentored and enriched just getting a window on this process. Really appreciate that. And I'd like to invite Julie Herman now to share about her research with us, and her presentation is entitled Archiving, Inhabiting, and Performing for Digital Space.
Thank you, Laura, and also thank you, Ellen, for all of your time in EHI. I didn't have anything prepared, but it's great to see you today. I am going to share my screen really quick and get my presentation going. So I've entitled my presentation Archiving, Inhabiting, and Performing for Digital Space. I really kind of wanted to hone in the intersection of looking at art history through the lens of the internet and vice versa, looking at the internet through the lens of art history. I kind of wanted to look at art culture and internet culture as sort of one of the same, because we're so bombarded with visuals all the time. And where is the line of, this is documentation or this is artwork? So I've kind of spent my time advocating for social media as a supplementary element to traditional gallery space. Also, mostly just because of the pandemic, and we didn't really have much access to museum space. And I wanted to kind of look at how the internet was able to carry the art world during lockdown. But overall, I've really just been focusing on elements of the digital and the physical and how they compare. How does in-person experience and web-based experience kind of have these intersections, and how do they contrast to each other? What are the benefits and downfalls of these two things? And more just a philosophical in general about the internet, but through the lens of being an artist and an art historian. I began my digital humanities research last year with the inception of my first curatorial project, which is suspension galleries. This was originally created as a final for one of my museum studies classes with Chris Reeves, after we had all moved online as a result of the pandemic. But I kept up the project, and it's basically an Instagram exhibition that showcases all of the artwork that these artists have made immediately before, during, and after the pivotal events of 2020, hoping to give these artists a space to show their work at a time where they weren't really able to have that access, and give them a wider audience that would then support them going forward. So each of these posts kind of links the viewer to the artist's Instagram page, their websites, how to commission them. And in addition to all of this, every artist is also asked to share personal anecdotes about how the pandemic has impacted their practice, whether for better or for worse. Some people got a lot of benefit from staying inside. Some people weren't able to showcase their work at all, and their sales went down. But I kind of really wanted to make sure I was documenting these stories, because I feel like a lot when you're walking through museums and you see an artist statement, you really don't get to know a lot about the artist. And they've sort of created this persona of being a creator. And I really wanted to kind of bring that viscerally human element back into writing about the arts, because we're going through this ridiculous time and we're all impacted in so many various ways. Over the course of the last year, Suspension Galleries has supported over 75 artists across 3 different themes or phases, to compare it to the pandemic, kind of reflecting the social climate during these times. So just to kind of go through quickly, I have suspension, expulsion, and revolution. I have all the definitions here. I sort of wanted to have like a double entendre with, suspension is hanging something from a wall like artwork, but it's also stopping something. Expulsion kind of came about during the Black Lives Matter movement, and being expelled from spaces. I was highlighting LGBTQ+ artists of color, and kind of giving them their space and their platform to share the artwork that they've made as a reaction or as a result to what was going on. And then over this past summer, I did Revolution, which was artists that had already submitted or artists that hadn't submitted, and kind of reflecting on this past year in quarantine, having a full revolution around the sun, all of our social revolutions that we've been going through. And that final one at the bottom is reintegration. That's prospective, hoping that I'm able to have an in-person show one day. So last year when I presented all of this, I was really kind of gung-ho on hoping that digital space would be able to be some sort of utopic thing that was able to almost replace our in-person experience, and kind of thinking about, well, Suspension Galleries has all these amazing benefits because it's accessible and you can go on your phone. There's no, contracts. And I was thinking a lot about all of the downfalls of museum infrastructure as a whole. But, because having like an aesthetic experience with artwork really only happens in person, I just wasn't really finding, what I wanted to find in my research. So I don't know. I was kind of going back and forth, figuring out if I could recreate museum space online, if I could recreate that experience because I didn't have access. So during the spring semester, I worked with Omar Hermanshah, who's here today, to kind of dig deeper into the sociology of the internet. And I produced a zine with these writings entitled Touchgrass. The first piece of writing is called Archiving the Internet, Media versus Material, in which I discuss the development of media technology and how it's changed the way that we document history, pretty much claiming that we have to protect physicality instead of relying on the cloud. And then the next piece is called Inhabiting the Internet, Liminal versus Livable, which compares Plato's allegory of the cave to our engagement with the internet, kind of arguing that this inauthentic reality that the internet creates for us isn't enough to sustain us. And then lastly, we have Performing for the Internet, Avatar versus Autonomy, where I kind of evaluate the advantages and disadvantages of being able to have control over how you're seen online in a way that face-to-face interaction doesn't do. So with all of this, as I was developing these writings, the more I realized that although the internet is really fascinating, it can't replace real life experiences. It can get really close, but it can't. I mean, that's kind of a given, but just kind of really digging into what it does for us as humans historically, it's a lot. So at this point, I was kind of hoping that my last saving grace would be making this Suspension Galleries website. How far could I push this? Am I able to replicate gallery space online? I had already done curating and social media management for this Instagram gallery, but I'm not a web developer. And so all of my plans for this website kind of fell through. I wasn't able with the platform to be able to do, VR, 3D rendering. And, that's just not what I do. I'm an artist, I'm an art historian, but I'm not a web developer. And I'm really proud of the website. I think that it worked out well. These are some examples of the pages. I wanted to make it kind of succinct. Sorry if my presentation's running long, by the way. I want to make it succinct and kind of have a different experience where you're able to click through and see it in a different way that's more compiled than Instagram offers. And even though it's not comparable to gallery space, I think I'm going to be able to use this as a contact sheet for my future curatorial endeavors and maybe offer it to other gallery spaces that are looking for certain artists that have certain aesthetics. And it's kind of a great overview of all of the great work that I've received being this online curator over the past year and a half. But over the past year and a half of researching, I've pretty much come to the conclusion that I'm not really interested in using the internet to make up for loss of real experience. And I feel like we've all kind of come to that conclusion after being locked inside and glued to our screens 24/7. But in general, I feel like last year I spent so long trying to bring physical elements into digital space, and I've kind of lost sight of what is really revolutionary, which is bringing digital space into physical space, kind of taking the intangible, ephemeral idea of the internet and recreating it, documenting it, hosting events about, making artwork about this thing that is just kind of lost on us and we take for granted every day. So as the pandemic is coming to a close and it's kind of the purpose of Suspension Galleries is also coming to a close because it kind of served its purpose. It's done what it's needed to do. And I'm hoping that I can really focus on making those in-person experiences happen and kind of getting all these artists that have met each other online to see each other in person and not kind of live in this fake space on social media. But yeah, so thank you so much. And special thanks again to Omar and Ellen for guiding me through my research.
Julie, thank you so much. And a perfect 10 minutes too, also. Wonderful. No, I see this theme emerging here about how, we get an idea, we start going one direction, and then we come back, maybe having found a dead end. but in the meantime, the work gets deeper. It becomes more significant, and if we're open to finding new things, finding what we didn't expect, we grow in the process, and the research grows in the process. So I'd love to invite questions for Julie about her project.
Like
just
really
dive in.
How about quickly before Mark? I know Mark has
okay.
I'll just give you a couple of words to chew on, and whether you can reflect on them, because they seem like they run through your project. But the words they're related, would be embodiment and vulnerability, and the way that the internet and art and that sort of intersects with that. So I'll just leave that there. But I know Mark has.
Great, Mark, and then hopefully we'll have time for Sophia too.
Yeah, Julie, thank you so much for that. Julie is taking a class with me right now, and I can't wait to hear ways in which you can make all of these things visible in the things that we're doing in our class. I loved this when I first started hearing about it last year, I guess it was, and I still love it. And I was a little bit puzzled by your feeling like it's done its purpose, because I mean the Instagram, the online gallery thing, because I was just wondering how you might talk about economics in the art world, which you're so attuned to. Is this in a way giving people opportunities that are actually sustainable over time, because people can't travel all the time? They don't have the money to travel to convene together, and the internet and occasions like this, they do give us opportunities that with money not readily available, we can convene, and you've so amazingly helped to make this happen with a virtual gallery. Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I believe that the only reason I say it served its purpose is with the hopes that we're going to get out of this Zoom space and this horror that we're kind of all experiencing in the world, because it works in that sense. Not being able to have access to museums, it's great to still engage with art online, but it also has so many other factors, especially on Instagram. And I have a lot to say on Instagram just as a platform, but I think that it kind of overstimulates us if we're getting our news, seeing our friends, visiting a museum, like having all this content that you don't really get to control all on your feed. And so kind of inserting a museum space into that, it's great, especially if you're passionate about art and you want to see it and kind of get follow these new artists and everything. And that's been great during this time, but I would much rather be able to use Instagram more as a tool to then allow these artists to connect in real life and be able to have those real experiences. And there's nothing like getting lost in a gallery and getting lost in a museum and having that social element of being in physical space and going to the coffee shop. And I think that if you take away all of those senses and you're kind of left with the screen, it's not the same. But I think it's a great tool. And I think that I really documenting these stories and having it all happen in real time has been amazing. And I've gotten a lot of these artists to get to know each other like over the internet. So yeah. But back to the economics, I guess, I do believe that the internet should be used as a way to make viewing artwork more accessible financially, I guess. But yeah, that's about all I have to say on that.
Thanks so much. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Great. Well, I think we're at 15 minutes for that presentation. So, Sophia, I know you have a question, but I think instead I'd like to hand you the spotlight, and we'll dive right into your research on the cultural politics of eating. So you can unmute yourself and take the floor.
Awesome. All right. I will also share my screen as well. Okay, so last summer I focused a lot on coffee, just as a commodity, and capitalism as a whole. So my shift towards this topic was mostly due to my interest in public health and public policy. Last summer, during my research, I was kind of exposed to a lot of different issues that I hadn't previously associated with coffee or the food system as a whole, like in environmental issues, social inequality in any consumer and producer relationship. So I wanted to learn more about regulatory actors and how they interact on a global scale. Um, and then another thing that I was super interested in was the circular relationship between food, how it's shaped by factors such as accessibility, economy, and societal values. But at the same time, it shapes these same things. And then also the concept of health as a social construct. Last year, or maybe it was 2 years ago now, I took a class on promoting well-being, and the class spoke to me so much that I ended up being a TA for it the following year, along with one of our former EHI members, Kimia. And basically, it just basically debunked what health means as it's applicable in different cultures, and kind of force students to think about what does being healthy mean to them, and recognizing that it's not the same across the board. Okay. So the first part of my project was looking more towards capitalism and food system. So something that I studied a lot was the slow foods movement, which kind of opposes fast food movements as a whole. But while everything behind the slow foods movement sounded great in theory, it's basically not easily implemented within a Western framework just based on fast-paced environment, and how ultimately it's a luxury to be able to grow your own food and prepare foods even. Fast food is much more directed at our perceptions of, or I guess our lifestyle as a whole, of being fast paced and convenient. The second thing was about infrastructure. So what I found was that a lot of large corporations, such as McDonald's and in this case Coca-Cola, were able to expand into developing countries based on creating their own infrastructure, where there were not even systems such as running water or electricity in some cases, and they were able to pave roads. So on the one hand, many countries were excited for this because it would allow them to have, instead of these old dirt roads, now there's updated infrastructure, a clean place to go and enjoy a meal. On the other hand, it sets in motion this nutrition gap in basically increasing fast food and processed food where it previously didn't exist. But this is difficult for government based food programs because they had excluded these groups and their populations in infrastructural development. So for them to go in and say that there's regulations on soda or fast food, for example, would be met with a lot of resistance because they had already discriminated against these groups. This little meme situation going on in the corner. It's half joking, but also like half not, because it's it's easy to stand from a Western framework point of view and kind of glorify slow foods movement or be against capitalism, which is not entirely what I'm trying to do, but also I know it's a real critique. So the second part was environment and politics. So a lot of infrastructural development and climate change have led to the term natural disaster, but in reality, these disasters are not natural, and by using that terminology, it shapes the way that we perceive climate-related disasters and gives the perception that they affect everyone equally, which is simply not the case. This often falls on minority groups or those who are already in poverty, and now that they have to deal with these issues, but they're also not being included in conversations surrounding infrastructure development. So this quote from Upton Sinclair about it's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on not understanding it. So that was in reference to policymakers and public health officials basically cutting corners and turning a blind eye towards many of the policies surrounding food and health regulations. And the way that basically this was able to flourish is in the framework of progress and development. Countries that are marked as undeveloped are often not seen as desirable trade partners. So because of this, countries are sort of forced or feel forced to develop and become commodified in terms of food distribution. The last, or I guess the third part, talked a lot about the issues that I saw within the modern nutrition system. So starting as a nutrition major, I noticed this right away, that every body and food are treated as fundamentally similar. So under this law, basically the way that people digest food and how it's consumed will be similar across the board, which is not true. So a large critique of like American obesity is that it's due to the fast food movement and rise of fast food as a whole. Although there's fast food in other countries that are fundamentally similar in terms of lifestyle, such as the UK. Basically, through my research, because other countries have sugar sanctions or are allowed to chemically alter fast food products per country, the nutritional information is not the same across the board per country. So if there was the exact same individual with the exact same metabolic rate, exercise, intake, output, everything the same across the board, but one was living in the US, the other in the UK, they ate the same fast food products over a period of time, the person living in the US would be substantially unhealthier in comparison to the person in the UK, due to these nutritional changes over the board. The role that shame plays in nutrition discourse, at least within many westernized countries, basically just that eating clean and being deprived, they're all basically forms of self-control, self-denial, and willpower, which are concepts fundamental to the Western idealization of the self. It says a lot about one's moral assessment, and overall, it's just a toxic environment. What seems like biomedical reasons for dieting are pretty much inseparable from cultural values such as productivity, longevity, and also appearance, obviously. So meal bars that are marketed as being healthy are not necessarily. They're still concocted with a lot of ingredients, as opposed to using regular sugar. Now you have these alternate sugars, which may be 0 calorie, but overall are harmful. As for the future of food, there's this Instagram account that I follow. Here's the I don't know what it's called. This guy does a lot of great exposure on different food production methods throughout the world. So this was a collective farm in the south end of Mexico City, and it's pretty huge, as you can tell from that picture, but everything is managed collectively by 120 owners, and they grow corn, beans, and squash, all done by hand without any chemical fertilizers. And their stance is basically that they are protecting their food from development, which is an interesting way to frame something. You're protecting it from development. Usually places want to develop because the term development obviously has a positive connotation. But here, farmers want the autonomy to sell to who they want when they want and not be forced to grow something that they don't want. And then this quote on the right is from the Wild Relatives documentary, which was following the seed bank from Aleppo to Lebanon due to a result of the Syrian war. So the migrants said so long as there is agriculture, there is continuity of life. And their focus on sustainability and perceptions of that people can unite based on agriculture and just sustainable food, I thought was really inspiring. So that is all for my presentation.
Thank you so much, Sophia. I think we have time for one quick question. We appreciated the presentation and how, again, you draw us in a full circle. We don't know till toward the end that you started out in nutrition, but we've taken this journey, which has allowed us to see that if we look at things from just a disciplinary perspective of nutrition, the way we do it in this country, there's so much that we miss. And when we invite other kinds of knowledge or information in, we see so many intersections. Mark, yes. Is that a hand?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Sophia. Just really, really fascinating. And I too appreciated the arc that you make in this project. It's almost like you really wind up with a kind of food communist approach, that's just really, really interesting and raises the stakes of the project in such a fascinating way. It really struck me as you were talking, giving that example at the end about sustainability, that attention to that mode of production demands getting people not to feel like the things that they need to be transported from across the globe. And that part of industrial agriculture and industrial consumerism has produced this sense that we need to have everything. That in order to eat, we have to have oranges whenever we want them, strawberries 24/7 year round. And I was just kind of wondering about, what's the way that we dial that back? Is it, acknowledging some kind of just fact of scarcity? And, to what extent is your project actually arguing for the acceptance of scarcity?
Yeah, that's a really good topic that I want to go more into, is specifically what would eating only locally sourced foods look like in different regions within the US, because obviously more climates that can grow more produce, like California, they probably wouldn't suffer to the extent that us in the Midwest would. I mean, pretty much we would just be having corn all the time, which is not great for a balanced diet. But the season, I think, eating seasonally, or even if we just dialed back the globalization and exportation, instead of receiving produce from Chile, we could just get it from California. So just dialing back for sure, but also I don't think that there's anything wrong with admitting scarcity. I think the power of choice is kind of illusionary in and of itself, because I mean, not everyone has a choice for what they eat, in terms of both accessibility and affordability, within the US, but also like globally, obviously.
Thanks so much for that.
Great. Thank you so much. We have 2 more student presentations, and I think we better just keep things moving so we can hear them all. The next 2 are actually pre-recorded on video, but I wanted to invite Harshdeep just to say hello if she's able and if her internet connection will allow that, maybe while I'm trying to make the connection work. So, Harshdeep.
Hello everyone, I'm a 3rd-year student in the EHI, and my research was about climate change with Professor Havrelock as my mentor.
Great, and I will now attempt to share that presentation.
Hi everyone, my name is Harshdeep Gerbil, and I've been researching climate change and the low-income experience over the summer. So no matter where you are in the world, you will feel the effects of climate change, though not equally. So I have been focusing on the regional changing waters and the impact on low-income communities. According to the Worldwide Fund, or WWF, 2 in 3 people live in water-scarce areas, and small global temperatures increases destabilize the water cycle, exacerbating the problem with intense flooding and droughts. In our backyards is the largest expanse of fresh water on Earth. As you can see here, in the metric units, the projections are quite alarming. Since 1970, the Chicago region has been warming at a rate of more than 0.4 degree Fahrenheit per decade, and winter temperatures have risen even faster at a rate of 0.9 degree Fahrenheit per decade. This warming has been correlated with increases of 2.6 degree Fahrenheit annual average temperatures since 1980, with the greatest increase of almost 4 degree Fahrenheit occurring in the winter. We have a longer growing season with earlier spring flowering of trees and plants, and fall frost occurs later in the year. Average minimum temperatures, the lowest temperatures on record on a given day, usually at night, of 3.4 degree Fahrenheit above normal. In 2006, and also we have seen several major heat waves, particularly those in 1995 and 1999. There are decreases in winter ice coverage on Lake Michigan and smaller lakes in the area, doubling in the frequency of heavy rainfall events over the last century also. So here's a more local focus from Lake County. The darker blue here indicates a higher percentage of families living in poverty. The experience of dealing with floods brought on by climate change would be more difficult for families in the Waukegan area near the coast. Here we see, along with Lake Michigan, the northwestern local waterways like the Fox River or chain of lakes will flood more. Recently in the area, I've also been noticing more flooding in the summers where parts of roads close down and water gets in the basement. You've all probably seen the flooding in local news. So in Lake County, the risk of flooding is from the lake itself, whereas in Chicago, the risk of flooding is from outdated sewer systems, also known as gray infrastructure, where the main focus is to get water out of the city using sewers. The $3 billion deep tunnel is a great example of this. The map on the right is from the Chicago Sun-Times, and it compares the number of flooding complaints in each area during the past summer in July. So this would be not summer 2021, but summer 2020. Again, the low-income south side is faring worse. The deep tunnel wasn't enough to keep sewage at bay either, and the gates had to be opened into Lake Michigan. And this is a map of the local trails connecting both the counties, Lake County and Cook County. It's part of the Burnham Plan Centennial Green Legacy projects, and the picture on the right is of people working on the Englewood Open Space Expanding Neighborhood Green Spaces program. So this is what I will be furthering my research with on the local solutions, how they're being implemented, and how local communities deal with climate change. So this was another example of, you can see in the before picture, this was at the elementary school. It's all concrete, and then here we have more of greeneries and like permeable concrete that will help absorb some water or just help mitigate the effects. So what we can do is restore wetlands and reduce the impact of flooding. Agriculture or suburban runoff cannot pollute the water and cause algal blooms, so managing non-point source pollutants is a step in the right direction. Rain gardens would also help stormwater get absorbed into the ground, and that's an example of green infrastructure. Rainwater harvesting could also just be as simple as a barrel attached to a downspout, or it could be large scale where the water is absorbed directly into the ground. So here's an overview of my summer reading list of this past summer. So I learned about the history and topography of the Great Lakes and the challenges that they face today in Dan Egan's The Death and Life of the Great Lakes. In Egan's account, the challenges posed by invasive species were more scientific, whereas in Banu Subramaniam's The Aliens Have Landed, I explored the complexities of invasive species in a humanities-centered way. Like by exploring questions like what determines a species' invasive status, because not all new species introduced to the lake from ballast tank water would be considered invasive. And it was about what exactly constitute as native and invasive. I learned about the modern human connection to water in Dr. Hannah Atisha's account of the Flint water crisis, and it gave me a bit more of an overview about how we get our drinking water and what happens when things go wrong. So I also spoke with Ashley Strelchik over the summer, a water resource professional at Lake County Stormwater Management Commission. Here she walked me through the various projects that help manage stormwater. I also plan on researching the implementation of these best practices on the UIC campus further on in my research. So this would be my outlook. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Harsh, for sharing your research with us and preparing the the video, and I'd like to invite questions for Harsh. Oh, actually, let's see. I appreciated the way the presentation went from very, very global and statistical to narrowed it down to, Chicago area and then specific neighborhood. And the next thing we know, it's much more personable, and their stories and their individuals. And so I feel like I've ended on a note of hope and engagement with that. I mean, I feel like we got educated, but we didn't get educated in a way that just was discouraging and disempowering. But instead, it's like, oh wow, people are working together to take steps and solutions. And I love that you're going to be bringing the research to UIC also. So that wasn't a question, but I'd be happy to invite specific questions about the project or about climate change or the intersection with greater impact on low income communities. Yeah, Mark, you have one?
Yeah, so
Desk, yep.
I have a question. If
right.
I can certainly.
Others are being reticent. Okay, go for it.
Yeah, I was wondering. Well, thank you so much for this. I love the fact that this is a project that is so carefully researched, and you have these ideas of making it go somewhere on the ground. Can you talk a little bit about what you want us to be doing at UIC? That's really exciting.
I think like the best way to go about this, like at this point in the research, would be just like knowing what helps and what doesn't. So the main concern that I had with like getting the project in real life, I guess, like out of paper, would be like just seeing or measuring the impact of the changes that we would possibly bring. I'm not sure if I would have any like individual choices. It's just like the overall lifestyle changes that relate to climate change would be it.
Well, I was wondering, I have a friend who is involved in, well, he's not involved in, he heads Slaughterhouse Free Chicago, trying to get rid of all of the slaughterhouses in Chicago. It's an amazing project, nonprofit. And I was just wondering, it's like, if you want to spearhead things on the ground, students and faculty can do that. Like, should we be, I don't know, I'm just making this stuff up, but Professor Havrelock has pointed out for all of us how bad it is to be consuming bottled water. Should we just not make bottled water available anywhere on campus, and and to contribute to the health of our lakes and fend off pollution by doing something like that? Just simple things that everyone could be advocating for that could contribute to the health of the planet and to our region.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So I think it would just be, since now we're seeing flood risks and the natural disasters that it was mentioned earlier aren't becoming natural, but rather anthropogenic. So that would just be like the overall.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Harsh, for sharing your research with us. And I think the questions you raise, Mark, are really good. I mean, it puts it back on us, and what kind of agency are we going to assume? And that whole question of, do we ban bottled water? I mean, I think that would be like so controversial, right? We would just like feed into the climate. But we have to think about those things, and how do we deal with that? And I'm just grateful we've got these water fountains where you can fill a refillable bottle now. So that's a great step. But if I'm really thirsty, you know what? I'm going to pick up a bottle of water at the Institute when I'm at an event. So. But enough on that. We have one final presentation, and that's by Lorena Nava on femicide in Mexico. I think Lorena is here and will be able to share her own screen. Oh, there you are. If you want to say a few words by way of introduction, feel free to do that too, although I know you have introduction right in the video as well.
Yeah, hi, I'm Lorena Nava. As I don't want to say too much that'll take away from the video, so I'll just share it now. Hello, my name is Lorena Angelica Nava. Can you hear it also?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, just wanted to make sure. I'm a third-year student at UIC. I'm double majoring in communication and political science, minoring in English, and I'm on the pre-law track. I first became involved with the Engage Humanities initiative the summer after my freshman year at UIC in 2020. My American literature professor, Margox Brown, reached out to me and encouraged me to join the EHI because it was an interdisciplinary program that brought students and faculty together. I found that immensely appealing, so I pretty much signed up the day after I got her email. So now here I am, very excited to talk to you about my research project, Femicide in Mexico. During my sophomore year of attending EHI events and participating in my humanities workshop classes, I was overwhelmed with the freedom I had of choosing my research topic. I could select any subject I wanted, do my research through various methods, present the project in any way I wanted, choose my mentor. Many ideas came and went to me, but there was always this one subject and issue that I kept coming back to, all because of my interest in this one book. This is Cosecha de Mujeres, or Harvested Women, a book written by investigative journalist Diana Washington Valdez that I've been familiar with since I was 11. When I first saw my mother reading this book, I only needed to look at the front cover, this single dirty high heel, to perceive the context of brutal violence towards women. It was an issue I couldn't fully understand at the time, but I still knew it was important and serious. This image stuck with me for very long, and when I think about it, was one of the reasons why I became so interested in investigative journalism. As I learned more about this book and the history surrounding violence against women in Mexico, I felt more compelled to investigate femicide and its impact on politics and society. The initial purpose of my research project was to observe the development of femicide between the 1990s and today, and understand its influence on the structure and norms and culture of Mexican society. For the 2021 summer research project, my main goal was to increase my knowledge on the general subject of femicide by studying different sources, taking notes, and evaluating data and statistics. The mentor that I chose and whom I still meet with today was Professor Raul Cintron from the Latin American and Latino Studies Department. During the summer, we agreed to meet at least every other week to discuss what I've learned from my sources. Every time that we did meet, I would summarize my sources, present some sort of analysis, and then both of us would discuss possible research directions I could take with those sources. Towards the end of the summer, I completed an annotated bibliography that I reviewed and revised with Professor Cintron. For this presentation, I would like to share some of the findings and name some of my sources and authors that most influenced my research. The term femicide was first used by feminist writer and activist Diana Russell at the International Tribunal on Crimes Against Women in 1976. She defined the word as the murder of women by men because they are women. This term and definition would be heavily adopted in Mexico between the 1990s to the 2000s because the country would report some of the highest femicide rates after other Latin American countries like Brazil. Citizens and scholars alike claim that such high rates were the result of rapid industrialization brought by the 1991 North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. Hundreds of factories were built in Ciudad Juarez and employed mostly young women due to the belief that they would be easier to control and less likely to strike or form unions. Because they worked in maquila factories, they were soon called maquiladoras. According to Sergio González Rodriguez, who wrote The Femicide Machine in 2012, as shown here, the growing presence of women in public unleashed men's hatred because of the idea that industrial assembly plants and public life in general are a space of masculine concentration. Such ideas were also the basis of the works of Geofredo Angulo Lopez, Michelle A. Holling, and Melissa W. Wright, who investigated gender as a construct, discursive violence, and language respectively in order to understand the societal belief that there is a fundamental difference between men and women. When female homicides and kidnappings rose to alarmingly high levels in Juarez, politicians, police officers, and reporters began to question women's moral values. Were they conforming to gender roles and staying at home as obedient mothers, obedient daughters, obedient wives? Or did they live a double life of drugs, prostitution, and delinquency? Such accusations influenced people to normalize violence and blame women for the brutal murders and attacks they suffered, even if they were working just to provide for themselves and their families. Femicide isn't just about murders and kidnappings, however. Scholars have also used the term to refer to general violence and abuse that is perpetrated against women to control them. The United Nations General Assembly has stated that femicide is a gender-based violence that negatively affects the integrity, health, and freedom of women. Researchers Arun Kumar Archaya and Jose Juan Cervantes explored this definition when interviewing 110 trafficked women from Mexico City and Monterrey, Mexico, to uncover the physical violence and emotional, psychological abuse they experienced in the sex industry. It should also be noted that femicide is not the only term that is used to describe violence against women. Feminicide has also been widely used, but researchers disagree on which is the most appropriate term. According to Marta Patrisia Castañeda Salgado, in her article Feminicide in Mexico, an approach through academic, activist, and artistic work, whichever term a specific scholar uses depends on their interpretation on the effects of violence. Femicide, which employs the murder of a woman because she is a woman explanation, brings forth a more sociological approach to violence against women that calls attention to gender inequality. Feminicide, on the other hand, is generally thought to be more theoretical and politically based because it challenges the social motives behind violence against women while also using a feminist and human rights perspective. Author and photojournalist Alice Shriver believed it was important to use the term feminicide because it forced people to recognize the murders and kidnappings of women as an important phenomenon that should be recorded and investigated, not just through institutions, but also through street art, literature, photography, and film. When first deciding to research femicide in Mexico, I had the idea of investigating its connection to the political state of Mexico and the history of corruption. However, after writing my annotated bibliography, I realized I was more interested in investigating language and discourse. I wanted to answer questions like, how does femicide differ from feminicide, and why do scholars disagree on their definitions? Why should we separate female homicides from male homicides? And why is language so important when describing femicide in the reports, the news, and social media? With these questions, I hope to develop an online article that combines investigative journalism and scholarly research. In the future, I will be interviewing experts on femicide and incorporating videos, images, and graphics into my digital article as a way of making it interactive and interesting for my readers. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and thank you to Ella McClure, Janaea Shaw, Margot Brown, and everyone else that's helped me with this project. I'm very happy to be part of this program.
Thank you so much, Lorena, for sharing your research with us. And I guess I'm just going to dive in with the first question and hopefully leave room for someone else too. But one of the things that strikes me is that the topic you're dealing with, while very important, is also very heavy. And I wondered if you could just share with us a little bit how you deal with that heaviness in relationship to the work, which also you clearly have a passion for. But how do you find balance and ways to kind of renew, to keep looking at what we need to examine that's hard to examine?
I mean, the way I think about it, well, when I was already like compiling my list of like the books and everything that like I was going to read and look at, it was pretty hard to look at some images that they showed because two of the articles that I read, which were like completely in Spanish, talked about violence itself and how it's like portrayed in the news through like, and they showed photographs of like just like violent scenes, which would include like dead bodies or just really gruesome stuff. And while it was really hard to look at, I mean, the way I think about it, like people have to share this. This has to spread somehow. And even if it's not for everyone, it's still important to spread that message. So that's what I was thinking about when I was doing this project. It's an important message. And even if it might be really sad, even though it's going to hurt a lot of people, it just really just hits home a lot, it's still important to recognize it and understand it, because that's also like an issue with femicide. Like not enough people give it the attention it needs, because either they think like, oh, violence is normal, just like it's just not just like everything else, but that's not the case. Like it's important to stop it, to find ways to prevent it by sharing it and spreading it with society.
Thank you so much. I realize we are at 11:30, and those who are staying on are going to need a little bit of a break and maybe a bite of lunch. So I want to thank each and every one of you for sharing your research today. I'm just so impressed what you've been able to do and how you're growing, and the strong voices with which you speak, and the openness as well. So thanks to all our student presenters, and also a wonderful thank you to the mentors also. This is work they do on top of everything else, and at the same time, I know that it's also very gratifying for them to guide this research and to be in relationship with our students and watch them grow intellectually. Again, I want to remind you about the afternoon session on the Humanities in Chicago, Health, Politics, Environment, and Culture, that will be moderated by Ellen McClure at the same Zoom link. So, thank you so much.